The Cannabis Conversation. A European perspective on the emerging legal cannabis industry.
Welcome to the Cannabis Conversation with Anuj Desai, where we explore the new legal cannabis industry by speaking to the professionals that are helping to shape it. Welcome. As ever, I hope you had a nice week and are adjusting back into working life in January, etc. Been a funny start to the year for me, but definitely back into the swing of things. I have some very exciting news on a personal front. I am very glad to be introducing my first official sponsor for the Cannabis Conversation. As we reach nearly 150 episodes, it's great to be bringing on a collaborator. Our good friends at Lumino, formerly Bloom Jobs, will be sponsoring the show for the next couple of months. I'm really very pleased about this news. Lumino are a boutique HR and recruitment agency that specialise in building high-performance teams for the European cannabis industry. They work in three main verticals: commercial, medical and plant-facing. You may remember Tom Gray, who's the CEO. He's been on the show a couple of times. And he and his partners, Ellen Jardim and Nikita Kretu, are definitely some of my favourite people in the industry. They're really well respected and liked across the sector in the UK and on the continent. Really well connected guys and just super helpful. A really positive force in the European sector. And I'm really pleased that Lumino are going great guns. So naturally, they wanted to be aligned with the best industry podcast in Europe. So I'm really glad that we can make this happen. You know, candidly, I haven't exactly been beating them off with a stick, but there's definitely been several people that have approached me about sponsorship over the last couple of years. But it was really important to me to have the right partner for this. And secretly, I was hoping Lumino would come knocking at some point, and I was very glad when they did. We are really well aligned on our viewpoints and approach to the space, and very focused on helping build a high quality industry. So I'm really looking forward to a fruitful relationship going forwards. So if you have any recruitment needs, please do contact Lumino and mention if you heard about them from here. I'll be providing links on our social post. The guys are working with loads of companies, also in North America, needing to resource for the European sector. So yeah, please do give them a shout. In terms of me, if you're looking for a commercial lawyer or some strategic consultancy on the UK and European sector, please do get in touch with me at anuj@canverse.global. Would really love to chat. Anyway, back to the show. Enjoy. On today's show, I've got Antonio Costanzo. Antonio is CEO of Curaleaf International, which is formerly EMMAC Life Sciences. Curaleaf are a US multi-state operator specializing in cannabis products, and Curaleaf International manages Curaleaf's business overseas. Antonio will tell us a bit more in a minute. How are you, Antonio? Welcome.
I'm very well, Anuj. And yourself?
Very good, thank you. Where in the world are you today?
I'm in London.
Ah, good. That makes two of us. Cool. So listen, you've had a very busy year as a business, so we'll get to talk about that in a minute. And then we'll talk about the wider European sector and get your views on that. But let's begin with a bit about you. If you can sort of introduce yourself and maybe say what you were doing before and how and why you got into the cannabis industry.
Sure. And first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very happy to be speaking to you. So my story begins a long time ago. Unfortunately, now I'm about to turn 49 in a few months. And I started my career after studying journalism in Paris in the media industry. I worked for Eurosport for 8 years. Number of roles there, from journalist to management. And after a few years, I decided that I wanted to move on and do something more business. And so I moved to the online gambling space, to a company called bwin, which at the time became very rapidly the largest online gambling company in the world. And I ran business development for them, which was a mix of what you think of traditional business development and regulatory affairs, and market accessing. So how did we get licenses? How could we enter new markets? After that, I spent some time at Uber in France, taking care of public affairs and government relations. And then I moved into the cannabis space. And that was 2017 when I joined the startup of Nuuvera. Nuuvera was a Canadian company that had a very short lifespan in that it was set up, built, listed, and sold within 1.5 years. and it was sold to Aphria at the beginning of 2018. That is when we decided to continue focusing on the cannabis opportunity, but rather than in North America, in Europe. And so myself and a few other people, we decided to co-found and to start EMMAC Life Sciences, which I ran as the CEO for 3 years until Curaleaf acquired us in April of 2021, so just a few months ago.
Wow, I love that story. I'll tell you why, because most people I've interviewed recently, and I love them all, but everyone's come from a corporate finance background. So it's really refreshing to hear you come from a media background. I'm a lawyer, but I came from a media background too. So how have you found that kind of journey from media and journalism?
It was a weird one, in reality, and not a planned one for sure. But the common aspects of all the companies that I've worked in, or the common theme, was regulation. And so if you think about it, media, I worked in the media sector when the media sector transitioned from analog to digital. And that triggered a number of changes in the regulatory environment. And we had a lot to work with and to deal with regulators. Likewise, when online gambling started, it was all about disrupting existing monopolies in the lottery world and introduce regulation for online gambling, which was very difficult. Similarly with Uber, introducing new regulation for ride sharing, for transports, for a different form of transportation, which was never really in the picture when regulators set up the rules a bunch of years ago. So when I joined the cannabis industry, I immediately realized that it was a great opportunity because I was familiar with regulated environments. And this was another one of those where there was an existing regulation that needed to evolve in order to be able to capitalize on the business opportunity. The big difference between what I've done in the past and what I'm doing today is that in the past, I often had to fight with politicians in particular to convince them to change the rules. Whereas here, it's not really the case, or it's seldom the case. It's normally politicians that decide to open up, if you look at what happened in Europe, decided to open up the use of medical cannabis to patients. And then it's more of a conversation with regulators on how technically to structure the regulation. But the political willingness, I found it way more present than in my past jobs, in my past industries.
That's even more of a surprise to hear that, I have to say. I mean, because, the thing that I talk with people is just how slow it's taking to kind of really change. Like there's great announcements, and the UK medical went live 3 years ago now, but very few prescriptions have been written. And, it was a front page news then, but it doesn't feel like things have moved on that much in the 3 years, or not as much as people had hoped for.
Yes, but there is a big difference between slow, which means it has opened up, and we need to accelerate growth, compared to my past experiences, which was, no, we don't want to open up. No, we don't want online gambling. We don't want ride sharing. And so that was a much bigger fight. Here is, yes, okay, we're going to do it. We're going to do it cautiously because we're not really sure how to regulate this. And we're going to give regulators the time to figure it out. But it is happening. And to your point, yes, it is a matter of a little bit of frustration because we would like to see things evolving quicker, but it is evolving. If you look at what happened in the past 3 years in the UK, for instance, you mentioned the UK, it opened up 3 years ago. Yes, we would like to see more patients using medical cannabis, but it is growing. The number of patients is growing. We've multiplied by 5 the number of patients that we serve in the past 12 months. So it is growing. In the last quarter, we had a growth quarter on quarter of 40% in the number of prescriptions. So we see the numbers going in the right direction. Could we do better if the rules were better written? Yes, of course. We could serve even more patients, but it's going to come. It's going to happen. It's just a matter of being a little bit patient and continuing the discussion with regulators to support them, because we shouldn't forget that regulators are dealing with something that is completely new for them in most cases. For 70 years, this product was completely illegal. So it was not part of the picture of what regulators were dealing with. And all of a sudden, in the past 10, 15 years, depending on the countries, even shorter than that, a few years in certain countries, they had to start taking care of medical cannabis and finding a way to regulate it. And for instance, in Europe, they decided to go down the pharma route because that's what they knew. That's what they were familiar with. So they just took medical cannabis and put it within the boundaries of pharmaceutical regulation, which is per se good. It's a very good starting point, sets the barrier very high, sets the quality standard very high, but clearly cannabis shouldn't be treated as aspirin or as paracetamol. It has some peculiarities that need to be taken into account and addressed. And I think that this is the challenge that we have as an industry, is supporting regulators in identifying the ways that can make medical cannabis more accessible to patients.
Yeah, super interesting. We're going to come back to this because I've actually just done a project for a client where I was getting into the world of EGMP and, I definitely fell down the rabbit hole for sure. So we'll come back to that in a bit. But when we're talking about your personal story, so you kind of have an appetite for kind of regulatory, contentious or new, complex, complexity, yeah. Did you approach the idea of cannabis in itself? Did you encounter any stigma in relation to that when you made the move?
Well, I made the move because of common friends that, introduced me to the opportunity at Nuuvera. And then, when I made the move, as I said, as soon as I started working on this project, I said, but this feels like online gambling 15 years ago. And then I realized that it was actually easier, inverted commas, than online gambling because of that element of politicians being more open to it.
Yeah, fantastic. Cool. Well, let's talk a bit about the company now. So formerly EMMAC, you guys rebranded at the beginning of the month, I think, to Curaleaf International. So why don't you tell us a bit about Curaleaf, both US, the mothership, and what you guys are doing in Europe?
Sure. So Curaleaf today is the largest cannabis group in the world, largest cannabis company in the US by revenues, largest cannabis company in Europe by footprint, certainly. It's difficult to assess revenues because most of the companies are private and the numbers are not disclosed. But clearly we have the largest footprint across the globe. We are operating in the US in 23 states. In Europe, we are operating in 9 jurisdictions with different assets, people on the ground, distribution capabilities, facilities where we cultivate or manufacture or distribute the product. So we have a fantastic platform on which to build the future of company, of a group, and partially also the future of the industry. This is the beauty of the Curaleaf Group, in my view, and the reason why, as EMMAC, back in the days when they approached us, we decided to join forces with them and to accept their offer to acquire us. The reason is because they are Boris Jordan, who's the founder of Curaleaf and the executive chairman, and the whole team, Joe Bayan, the CEO, Joe Lusardi, the executive vice chairman and one of the founders. They are very much forward-looking and forward-thinking. So they're not building a company for today, for tomorrow, or for 2023. They're building a company for 2025, 2030, 2035. And you can see that in the way they approach the US. They approach the US as a CPG company. And that was very quick. They were probably the first company to do so early on. And they also approached it by going very broad very early on, whereas other companies were focusing on 1 or 2 states and going very deep in those states. It's a very fair strategy, but I think in the long term, going wide and broad initially, very early on, will have advantages. And similarly, we've done the same thing here in Europe. When we founded EMMAC 3 years ago, we went broad and wide very early on, and we wanted to be vertically integrated and fully in control of our destiny from day one. Obviously, that meant investing a lot of money, having a big team in place, and taking a lot of risks. But it has positioned us in the best possible way, in our view, to take advantage of all the openings that are now happening or we think will happen in the coming months and coming years. So I think that the group today is in the best possible position to take advantage of all these opportunities. It's extremely early stages. And I would say even in the US, although the US is much more mature than Europe, it is still early stages. We're still only witnessing the beginning of this industry. And those of us who will be here in 10, 15, 20 years will see this industry evolve dramatically in a way that is difficult to predict today, but clearly it's going to be one of the big worldwide industries that will, shape the economy in the coming 10, 15, 20 years.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the US comparison with Europe is similar in the lack of harmonization between the various states in both. So there is lots to change over time. Maybe you can also, if you don't mind, dig in a bit more about Curaleaf International. For those that aren't familiar with EMMAC or Curaleaf, you own a number of different companies across the value chain. Maybe you want to talk a few of those. And are you actually going to be folding them into the Curaleaf brand, or are they going to remain companies in their own right?
So Curaleaf International, formerly EMMAC Life Sciences, is today still the only vertically integrated and multinational European cannabis company. So we have our cultivation facility in Portugal. It's a company called Terra Verde that we acquired early on, has the second oldest license in Europe for the cultivation of medical cannabis, in operation since 2014. We have 2 EU GMP pharmaceutical labs. You mentioned the complexity and the importance of EU GMP. We have 2 of those labs, one in Spain, one in the UK. The one in Spain is our R&D and extraction and manufacturing facility. The one in the UK is both a manufacturing facility and also a distribution facility for the UK market. And then we have a number of licenses to import and distribute medical cannabis across different jurisdictions. I mentioned the UK already, but also Germany, Switzerland. We have a very strong partnership in Italy with a local distribution company, and we are able now to bring our product into Italy as well. So we have built this platform of assets, which are both facilities and licenses, which today are the largest and the broadest in Europe, and give us the ability to be very quick in deploying our assets and our goods and our brands in the different jurisdictions.
Yeah. And you guys have focused in on the medical space. Have you left CBD behind completely, or?
So we had a CBD division back in the EMMAC Life Sciences day. Before the transaction with Curaleaf, we decided to sell those brands. We sold them to a company called EMMAC. We are still a shareholder of. And the reason why we did that is because Curaleaf had in mind that, if going forward they wanted to develop the CBD opportunity in Europe, they wanted to do it with their own brands. So those brands were not relevant at that stage for Curaleaf. Today we are focusing, as you said, on medical cannabis. But yes, we're looking at CBD as an opportunity to accelerate our growth in certain jurisdictions in Europe, in particular because we also have 2 pending applications, novel food applications with EFSA and with the FSA in the UK. One of them has been already validated at European level with EFSA. It's the one with PharmaBios, one of our 2 partners, and the other one has been validated in the UK. So if we get to the approval of those applications, we will have a CBD ingredient that we will be able to use across all European jurisdictions as an ingestible product. And that would open the door to a European-wide distribution of our products. And I think that the third element that we are very closely looking at, and I'm sure that we will talk about it in more detail, is recreational cannabis, because we think that recreational or adult use cannabis is going to happen very soon in certain jurisdictions in Europe.
Yeah, we will get onto that. Okay, cool. That's great to understand that in terms of medical and CBD as well. How has COVID treated the business? I mean, clearly treated it well because you managed to get acquired during it, but on a kind of operational level or just a kind of business level, what did you see?
So we saw different things. We saw some slowdown, not on the operational side, but more on the regulatory side. Regulators, and rightly so and understandably so, were very busy with dealing with COVID. And so the ministries of health across all jurisdictions in Europe did not really have time to take care of cannabis. And as I said, it's completely understandable. So the result of that was that there were delays in approvals, delays in audits, delays in licensing, which made it so that our business grew not as fast as we would have liked to. We still grew, but we had plans to grow quicker. Similarly, it had an impact on patients, as in doctors were very busy with rolling out in certain countries, in particularly COVID vaccination programs. And so they had less time to see patients for other matters, including medical cannabis. So in certain countries, we saw a slowdown in the number of new patients coming into play because doctors had less time. But that is now changing. Since the summer, we see now the numbers are going up significantly and rapidly again. On the positive side, I think COVID validated the industry, and not just in Europe, but also in the US. If you think that in the US, cannabis businesses were deemed and considered as an essential business. And so they were kept open during all lockdowns. That was an indication that, it is, as an essential business, it means that people need it. And they need it because of it's used to be to treat their conditions or some of their conditions. Similarly, in Europe, despite the delays that I mentioned, the prescriptions kept on coming and doctors kept on seeing patients for medical cannabis prescriptions. So it was a very important step because we had the confirmation of the fact that regulators were treating and are treating medical cannabis as a medical product and as a pharmaceutical product, so within the same category. In terms of our operations, it did have a small impact, particularly I would say at the beginning in the first lockdown, when we saw, inevitably, as everyone else, we had to slow down certain sides of the operation. But again, we kept on working. People were going to our facilities because we were dealing with a medical product. And so they had to keep the facilities open and keep on producing. So we kept on producing. In terms of moving product around, it hasn't had any impact. We've been able to move the product around in between countries, from Portugal to Spain, from Spain to the UK, to Germany, to Israel. So that was not an issue.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's great to get that overview from a few different angles. And as we said, ultimately you still managed to get acquired during that whole process. So there must have been a lot of conversations. I was obviously reading the business press at the time. There seemed to be a few options for EMMAC that were being kicked around a SPAC and all these sort of things. Well, obviously, joining another company was the best option for you. How did you kind of evaluate that situation?
As you said, we had a number of options on the table. We had looked at the opportunity of making a deal with a SPAC, so listing in the US on NASDAQ through a SPAC. Then we looked at the opportunity of listing in the UK, which was one of the goals that we had since the beginning. We finally got green light, we as an industry, from the authorities in the UK to list medical cannabis companies in London. And while we were very close to doing that, so to listing in London, Curaleaf approached us. They knew us already and they approached us and they said, guys, we would like to have a conversation. And so, as you would do in these kind of situations, you assess the opportunity, you compare it to what the alternatives that you have on the table. You speak to your board, you speak to your key shareholders, you recommend what you think is the best solution, and then you go with it. And I recommended to the board and the board recommended to the shareholders to accept the proposal from Curaleaf because we thought it was the best option for us to continue growing the business and to scale the business because of what I said at the beginning, because we're now part of the largest cannabis group in the world. We have the resources, both, from a human perspective, from a financial perspective, to grow the business and grow it quickly. So we thought that was the best option for the shareholders, to create value for the shareholders. And that's why we decided to do the deal.
Yeah, well, that's great. And great news for the industry as well. I think it's certainly sparked a lot of excitement and, I think is getting the global industry really going. So it's good to see this sort of M&A action going on. So now let's maybe move on to the kind of general topic of the show, which is just a broad overview of European medical cannabis. I think you're really well placed, as the sort of largest group in Europe to sort of give this view. But what do you view the current state of the market as, and where are we in the life cycle, if you can sort of give us that viewpoint?
It is still very early stages in the life cycle of this industry. If you take the two most developed countries in Europe in terms of medical cannabis, Germany, I'm talking about wider Europe. I include Israel into the European industry or in the medical cannabis industry. And so Germany and Israel are the two most developed countries today, and they're still a small market. And so everything is to be built. We now have some major countries that have opened up to medical cannabis: Germany, UK, Italy, Israel. We're waiting for France, that is going now through a pilot project, and they will open up for good in the beginning of 2023. We're waiting for Spain, who's now in a political process in parliament with a commission that is studying how to legalize and regulate medical cannabis. Poland is coming on stream, Czech Republic, Malta, Portugal. So it's all going in the same direction. All countries are opening up at different stages of the process, but they are all going in that direction. In addition to that, as I mentioned earlier, we are now looking at the opportunity of recreational being legalized in certain countries. There are two pilot projects that are being deployed, one in the Netherlands and one in Switzerland. There are a number of political processes that are currently going on in various jurisdictions, again, at different stages: Malta, Portugal, Luxembourg, Italy, Germany, which probably could be in my view, the trigger to I wouldn't probably use the word landslide, but to an acceleration of the process across the continent.
Yeah, we'll come on to adult use in a minute because it's what everyone's talking about at the moment. So it's somewhere we definitely have to cover. But to just go back to medical for a moment, let's start with Germany, actually, because we need to talk about it. How are you seeing things in Germany, and both from your personal business perspective, but also the market overview?
We are happy with the way things are going in Germany for us. Our numbers are growing, still early stages, but they're growing. So we're very happy. As I mentioned earlier, Germany is one of those countries where COVID had some impact on the number of patients. So the growth has slowed down in the past months because of COVID and because of doctors having less time to see patients for medical cannabis. But now that is changing again, and the numbers are beginning to go up again. It's a very competitive market. There's a number of companies now operating in the market, in particular a number of importers. But, we think that we have this competitive advantage of being vertically integrated, which allows us to be very competitive on pricing. It has been something that has made a difference so far for us, for instance, in the UK. We think it can make a difference for us in other jurisdictions, in Germany, in Italy, and moving forward elsewhere, because we are able to bring prices down, which is exactly what we did in the UK. We were one of the first companies to bring prices down all the way to get to below the illegal market prices. And that has improved the access to the product for patients and has accelerated the uptake of patients on medical cannabis.
Yeah, brilliant. And with Germany, are you expecting to see any challenges coming from domestic cultivation coming online in Germany?
No, we don't think that is going to have a major impact. First of all, it's limited quantities for the time being. Yes, it will have probably some impact on the pricing, because the price at which the product is going to be sold will be competitive, but we're not scared of that. We're not afraid of that. We can be very competitive with that pricing as well. So we just see it as an additional set of competitors. But as I said, the quantities of product that are being grown in Germany are very limited so far.
Yeah. And broadening it out a little bit, what are some of the up-and-coming territories that you're sort of seeing in Europe? I mean, Poland and Czech are the ones that people talk about a lot as well.
Yeah, Poland and Czech certainly are coming on stream, and we're looking at those. We're working on those opportunities as well. I mentioned the UK. UK is still early stages, 3 years old only, the opening of the market, and the numbers are increasing and improving very rapidly. So we're very bullish on the UK. And I think we're also very bullish on Italy. Italy is in a interesting position today because obviously the market is open, but there has been a very restrictive approach to the regulation. And so very few companies have been able to bring product into the country. And that was only done through either the Ministry of Health in Holland or through tenders. And I can now tell you that we are, with our partners in Italy, Pharmalabo, the first company to be able to register an API cannabis product. It's an extract in Italy with the Medicines Authority. And so in the coming few weeks, we will start shipping product in Italy directly.
Wow. Okay. That's exciting indeed. Oh, brilliant.
It is.
Oh, cool. And that kind of moving on and sort of recapping on a little bit of what you were saying earlier around regulation, obviously we'd like it to really open up, but if you can be kind of realistic in what you can expect, what would you like to see next in terms of regulatory change? More harmonization or specific measures?
I think there is a good degree of harmonization on the production side, because EU GMP standards are the standards that everyone accepts, and GACP for cultivation are the standards that everyone accepts. Now, there are some differences in terms of how the EU GMP standards are interpreted in different jurisdictions, and sometimes even within the same jurisdictions, within the regions. The example is Germany in this case. So yes, a little bit more harmonization would be appreciated, but I think where regulators can do most in terms of easing the access for patients, because in the end, that's the point, right? We want patients to have an easier access to the product, and that is through the way in which it is prescribed by the doctor. So in some jurisdictions today, it is still specialists that have to prescribe the product. So the GP, the general GP, cannot prescribe the product. So we would like in every country to see GPs being able to prescribe the product. We would like to see more education. We would like to see GPs being trained about medical cannabis and about how to prescribe it and what is the use of medical cannabis that they can make. And we would like to see more products coming in and more form factors. Today, I would say 99% of the jurisdictions, it's flowers and extracts. We would like to see more form factors. We would like, to see vapes. We would like to see pills, tablets, gels, because we think it is important to give a bigger choice to patients, because, certain conditions are better treated with flowers, other with oils, but, some people prefer to take a pill rather than drops of an oil. So that's another element, I think, where regulators can certainly help us in developing this industry forward.
Yeah, I think the form factor one is really interesting. I think if we really want this to open up to people that have never really experienced cannabis before, it needs to look more like a medicine, or at least the type of medicine that the people are used to seeing, I think, is going to make people feel a bit more relaxed about it, because, there is a large wall of ignorance and stigma attached to it. So that's just my personal opinion on that side of things.
Yeah, I agree. And we see it. We clearly see it. Some people are not comfortable using flowers. They don't really know how to use the flower. They have to grind it. They have to put the measure 1 gram. They have to vaporize it. And sometimes they prefer oils. Some people do not like taking oils because of personal issues, and they would prefer to take a pill, a tablet. So it's just like in any other industry, right? The more choice you give to consumers, in this case to patients, the better chance you have of finding what is suitable for them.
Yeah, and I guess to underpin that slightly, and you're talking about doctor education, I think a key part of that is generating more research and data. How are you guys sort of approaching that, particularly if you're launching a new product in Italy? How are you kind of approaching the idea of clinical trials and data?
Yeah, so from the very beginning of the Curaleaf International, back then EMMAC Life Sciences story, we put a lot of focus and emphasis on research and development. Actually, the first deal that we ever signed when we founded the company was not a commercial agreement, but was a research agreement with Imperial College in the UK, which is one of the most trusted and highest quality research institution in Europe. So it was a fantastic achievement already for us back in the day. And since then, we've been working with them, but we've also been working with other research institutions, in particular with some universities in Italy, to create bodies of research or bodies of work on our products, and not just on our products, but on cannabinoids in general. And it takes time, obviously. It is something that needs to be done for the long run. It's going to take 10, 15, 20 years, to get to the stage where you have a clear view of all the components of the cannabis plant. You know well how they act, how they interact with one another, how they interact with other active pharmaceutical ingredients that might be added to the composition, to the formulation. So it's early stages in that respect as well. But we have been putting a lot of focus on that piece. And it's another element that was a point of contact with Curaleaf when we started the conversation, because that's exactly what Curaleaf have done in the US to develop new products. So they have a very strong research and development arm that focuses on new product development, both for the medical and the recreational side of the business. And so we kind of saw it as combining the best of two worlds. So we could bring our pharmaceutical research and development studies in the work that we've done so far with the different institutions. So let's not forget that in the US, for a long time, it was not possible to research cannabis. Whereas on their side, they can bring to us here in Europe all the product development research that they've done in the past few years, which hopefully very soon we will be able to translate into products, new products being offered to patients and to consumers here in Europe as well.
Yeah, that sounds like a great marriage of two different areas of research. So yeah, I look forward to seeing results of that. So we're moving on to sort of final part of the show. We've talked about it already, but the prospect of adult use in Europe, I think it's encouraging, the signs that I'm seeing. I wonder how overexcited some people are getting, only because of the amount of time I think it might take for this to actually become a reality. What's your views on it? There's some positive noises from Italy, Switzerland, and then recently with Germany. It's all rumours at the moment, but all of the coalition parties seem to have some forward-thinking stance on cannabis. How are you seeing all of this in terms of time perspective and what might happen?
We are very excited about this. I really think I'm part of those who are very excited. And I think I'm very excited for two reasons. Number one, because we are really seeing the political debate heating up. And, politicians are very cautious about these kind of things. And when they really start working on it, it's a very positive sign. And the second reason why I'm very excited about it is because you have to get very excited about it very early on if you want to build something and be ready for when it actually happens. it is going to take some time. So first of all, I think we need to divide in two segments, in two baskets. One is the two pilot projects that are currently being deployed, one in the Netherlands and the other one in Switzerland. Those ones are happening. No, the regulators are working on them. So in the next months, we will see those pilot projects coming to life. The other basket is obviously those countries where it is a political process that is being implemented and not yet the regulatory one. But it is equally, if not even more important, because first of all, as I said, it's a very important sign, but also because this is when you hopefully have the ability to shape what the future regulation will look like. Because, politicians will make decisions, will give guidance to regulators, and that's when most of the work is done. Obviously then, the details are crucial, very important. So it will be an ongoing work, as in every regulated industry with regulators, and it will never end because they will always want to work on it. But this initial phase is really crucial to get it right. And so we're seeing multiple things happening across multiple jurisdictions. I mentioned a few. In Portugal, there are 2 draft laws currently being discussed in Parliament. Now, the government just collapsed a few weeks ago. There are elections planned in February, but our understanding is that as soon as the new government is formed, the conversation will resume, and the goal will be to combine the 2 drafts into one draft and to then have a vote by the end of 2023 in Parliament in Portugal. Then you have Luxembourg and Malta, who have announced that they want to legalize. Now, I'm pretty sure that they're not doing it the right way. I think they are making a mistake because they're going down the route of decriminalization and home growing. So it's not really about creating a real industry. It's about decriminalizing and allowing people to grow 4 plants per household at home. We don't think that's the solution. That will still benefit the legal industry. And so we hope that the governments in Luxembourg and Malta will change their mind or evolve over time and open up, the real recreational industry. Then you have Italy, who is probably going to have a referendum on decriminalization and home growing again mid of next year. If it does happen, I think it's going to be very important because Italy has been very, very conservative about cannabis. And if the referendum happens and if the vote is positive, i.e. it is decriminalized and home growing is allowed, I think that politicians will move fairly quickly to properly regulate. They won't leave it to that. They will probably move and regulate it in a different way, in a more structured way. And then you have Germany, which today is probably the most exciting opportunity that we have on the horizon. And as you mentioned, there is a coalition negotiation that is ongoing between the Socialist Party, the Green Party, and the Liberal Party. And everyone knows that it is part of that negotiation, that legalization of recreational cannabis is part of that negotiation. We will hopefully know very soon if it becomes part of the coalition agreement. First of all, we will know soon if they manage to find an agreement. And so if there is a coalition, and if the coalition happens, if recreational cannabis is part of the coalition agreement. All the signs point in the right direction. We have already started working on that scenario because, as I said earlier, you have to prepare very early on. Yes, it's going to take time. It might be not before the end of 2022 or mid of 2023 that we see something really becoming concrete in terms of regulation in Germany. But it's now that you start working and building and preparing your company for that time.
Wow. It's a very positive stance on it, which is great to hear. Do you think for Germany, for example, when they have sorted out who's in that little gang and what the rules are between them, are they likely to start with the pilot projects as well, in your opinion?
We don't know. I've heard different rumors about that. I think the most reliable rumors that we've heard are that they would go for a proper, real, complete legalization of adult use. So not just a pilot, but that rumor might be wrong, and we will see when things develop. I don't think there is a need for a pilot, honestly. I think, there is enough evidence, there is enough expertise, there is enough experience out there in other jurisdictions to go with a proper regulation. What we've seen in the US, in Canada, in Uruguay should give politicians enough comfort to legalize recreational cannabis for good and avoid the step of a pilot project, which might be not sufficient to fight against the illegal market, might create frustration with consumers, might create frustration with law enforcement agencies and might create frustration also with the industry. And I understand that the industry is not the primary focus of politicians, but the other elements should be. And I think that a proper full legalization would be the right way forward.
Yeah. Well, I mean, let's hope. It would be great if things open up with some pace. So my final question then is, if things do progress on the adult use side of things, how similar or how different do you think it will be to North America, given we do have a different approach to regulation in Europe than you see in the US and Canada?
It's going to be interesting to see how it develops. And again, we don't have many comparison points. I think if you look at what Switzerland and the Netherlands are doing in terms of the pilot project, they have regulations in place, in particular the Netherlands, that are similar to the ones that we find in the US, in North America. So in that respect, for recreational cannabis, they haven't looked at doing something in a much different way than what was done in North America. So I think we could see something similar happening in Europe. There might be some quality standards that are specific to Europe that are required. There might be some differences in terms of distribution. I think that in certain countries, we might see pharmacies having a role in the distribution of recreational cannabis, just because in Europe, in certain European countries, pharmacies have a very important social role. So I could see that happening alongside medical cannabis, obviously. But yes, it is one of the open questions that we have. How will regulators go about this? And hopefully they will not over-regulate it, because there's no need to do it.
Yeah, fingers crossed a pragmatic approach is taken. That's never a given, though, sadly. Antonio, we could have talked for ages, actually. This is super interesting, and it's really great to hear your views on a lot of this, because I think, you're really well positioned to give an expert opinion. So thank you for sharing that.
Anush, thank you very much, and thank you to everyone. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, please subscribe, rate, review and share the podcast. It will help me spread the good word on how this amazing industry is developing. I work with various cannabis startups to help them get funded and grow. I also work with corporates and international cannabis companies to help them understand and navigate the European cannabis sector. We're working with some great clients across the cannabis value chain, and we'd love to help you too. Please visit www.canverse.global to get in touch.